People have always gathered around a fire to tell stories, because telling our stories is the best way we have to keep our dreams alive.
A lot of teenagers are very ignorant about their family history. A lot of them see it as, man, I don't care about that, you know, I'd rather play basketball, you know? And then a couple of months later, once they find out, man, my ancestor did this, my ancestor did that.
When my great-great-grandmother was 12, she walked from central Canada to South Dakota with her sister on her back and a white man's bullet in her leg.
If you don't know about your history, you really don't know about the struggle.
My grandfather was one of the very few people who was lucky enough to escape from a concentration camp.
If you don't know your history, you don't know yourself. And I mean, that's just something that you really got to search deep within.
We all going through the same struggle, you know, to get equal rights, equal opportunities.
And the reason why that they fought and persevered through all of this is because I can have my place at the table.
I find strength in my ancestors because I'm living the American dream that my ancestors wanted.
The American dream. To live in a white house with a white picket fence and to have a little dog named Rover.
In order for people to give up everything and to come over in small boats to America, they must have it pretty hard in their homeland. They must think America is something amazing.
My grandfather and my grandmother came over to the United States on a boat.
They get on these boats hoping to come to America for a better life, and they're putting their life in jeopardy.
My ancestors thought America was the place to be.
America is the place to be.
But they were very disappointed when they got here because it wasn't what they dreamed of at all.
As a little kid in Haiti, I heard all these wonderful stories, how people in America walk around money, you know, there's pennies and dollars, money on the floor, and everyone is rich and they're happy, there's no violence. So I couldn't wait to come here, you know, because when I was in Haiti, it was so harsh. Food, malnutrition. My neighbors, they couldn't eat. They couldn't afford to eat. So I was very disappointed when I came here. I was actually looking forward to see money on the floor, and I did not even see one penny.
I think in my ancestors' mind, they felt like it was beautiful land. And I guess the American dream, or knowing that California was just across the street, was like, hey, you know, maybe we could start a new life and become Americans.
When my dad got his first car, my dad was shocked because he couldn't believe that, you know, man, I'm here. I'm in California. I have a job, I have a car, I have a family.
My great-grandfather who came to America felt very, very strongly about what he wanted in his life, and what he wanted was freedom.
In Haiti, politics is dangerous. You take your life in your hands. If you decide to go against the government, seen people getting burned alive, chopped alive, stoned to death with my own eye. And I was just a little kid.
Even though these stories are so different, a lot of times it's really the same story. My Chinese ancestors believed that there's this gold mountain, and there's all this gold in the mountain, and if they came to America, they would be able to harvest it and make a lot of money. My Japanese ancestors came because they thought, you know, America was a place where they could just succeed and they would have equal rights and things like that.
When I was in about 6th or 7th grade, I was assigned to do a family history tree. And so I knew that my mom and my auntie knew a lot about that. So they helped me out But that wasn't the end of me learning about my history. It was really the beginning. And I wanted to learn more about my history to figure out, man, where did I get some of these traits? You know, good looks. The main trait that I had gotten from my ancestors was survival. What I feel slavery would have been like, I would have a white man telling me what to do. I would have to plant and harvest crops, you know, come back to a little shack, wouldn't have that much to eat, only have enough to get by to the next day.
When they took us from Africa, they bring us here and they separated us. Some of us went to Haiti, some of us went to Jamaica, and some of us, you know, we were all over. And then the thing is, when they get to another plantation, most of the time, I mean, they change their names. They have new names, new last name, new first name. So you can never track them.
There was much injustice for the slave family. Women were breeded by their slave masters in order to gain more people into the workforce. They were broken up at the whim of their slave master. And also, the kids were sold off in auctions like cattle.
Everybody else who came to this country with hope. They were leaving something bad, they were coming for something good. And whether or not they actually found it, that was the idea. And so they always had that hope driving them forward, and there was a chance of making it to the top. You came over here on a slave ship, you had no hope and no chance. You know,
No choice to leave.
Nothing.
I have an ancestor that came from Spain. He was on a boat going to America with African slaves. On the boat, he fell in love with an African woman. In order to live with her, he had to buy her as a slave. He paid $50 and bought her for $50 and the children. But eventually, when he lived in Louisiana, he had to pretend he was black in order to have a normal life with his family. So all through this time, everybody thought my Spanish ancestor was black, which he wasn't. So how's that for crazy?
My ancestors are my first heroes. And that's why, you know, I say to myself, you know, when I'm down and like, I don't know if I could do this, I'm like, well, if my ancestors could survive through slavery, I know I can survive through this little problem that I'm going through. And I just keep going.
All 8 of my great-great-grandparents came through Ellis Island. My great-grandmother Helen, who lived in Ireland, wanted to come to America, and she was only 8 years old, and her sister was 16. In Ireland, the Irish were very, very poor, and all they survived on was potatoes. And in that time, the potatoes were infected by a fungus, and they had nothing to eat for many, many years. And so they went off, just the 2 children, on the boat to America through Ellis Island to seek a better life. And they kissed their parents goodbye, and they never heard from each other again for the rest of their lives. During the potato famine, over 1.5 million Irish people fled to the United States. There was a widespread fear that these immigrants were bringing diseases to America, so they set up a screening station called Ellis Island. The boats that came to America that the Irish boarded on were called coffin boats. There was no air, there was no water, you would not get fed. There were rats everywhere, there was disease. When they arrived in America, on average, 20% of the people that started were dead because of the horrible conditions.
A lot of people come to America thinking that it's going to be so easy, and it ends up not being.
For example, like all our ancestors felt that America was just like the place to be. And then it seems like all our ancestors got there and it was like it wasn't the fairy tale. It was more of a nightmare.
When I was a little girl, from the age of 1 to 5, I had no idea that I was somehow extremely different from anyone else around me. When I went into grade 1, that's when I really started experiencing a separation between me and other students. And I would come home crying a lot of the times because they would call me squaw, or they would call me like wagon burner or prairie nigger, and it was horrible. I'd always wish that I was white. I would always wish that I was white.
I've been called chink, jap, whitewash, banana, things like that.
Well, I've been called a mixed mutt, a Blaxican, a wetback, all sorts of type of other names that they can call, like a mixed dog. And it was so sad because I was growing up confused in a way, but at least I found myself now.
For some reason, the white men always looked at North America as a vacant place or free land to expand into. From the beginning, the idea was to so-called civilize the Indians. The way I see European society is that they didn't understand our culture. They didn't want to understand our culture. So instead of trying, they said, hey, this must be the devil's work. So then it becomes okay to go out and kill the devils. My great-grandfather, Chief Red Crow, spent most of his life trying to negotiate and make treaties with a government that repeatedly did not keep its word. I remember hearing stories from my mother and my father about how the Europeans would come over and they would make it seem as though they were being kind to the Indians by giving them blankets for the winters and stuff, when in fact, they had taken the blankets from the smallpox ward in the hospital. This had a huge impact on Native Americans and killed thousands of them.
The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. And after the Civil War, once slavery was over, people thought that slaves would be able to make it on their own, and that wasn't true. They had to become sharecroppers, and them being sharecroppers was just as bad as them being slaves because they were so much in debt. I have a third-grade grandmother by the name of Fredonia Parrish. After the Emancipation Proclamation, she became a free slave and became a sharecropper and lived with her husband, Emmons Parrish. They went on to have 165 acres of their own land and 11 children. She had to struggle, she had to sacrifice, and she had to survive the 3 S's. After slavery, the blacks really pulled together to build their own schools, such as Aberdeen Freedom School, where Fredonia's daughter became one of the first teachers from 1890 to 1910. And whatever they did, which is my thing right here, they never gave up and they never gave in. The odds against them having their own land was just so high, It's almost like making it to the NBA, their chances of getting their own land was like making it to the NBA right now.
The most painful memory I have of my ancestors and my people are the residential schools. In residential schools, the theory was to kill the Indian and save the man. And so they'd start by beating the Indian out of the child. They took children from 5 to 18 away from their parents. As soon as they entered the school, they would have their hair cut off. It was definitely like military. You had to get up at a certain hour, cold showers. In the residential schools, if a child spoke their native language, they were punished. And one way they were punished was the nuns would take an elastic band and they placed it up to the child's tongue, pull it out as far as they could, and just smack it. Children start actually believing that it was bad to be Indian. They would sometimes be allowed to go home on the weekends, and my grandparents would give them sage to burn, and they would say prayers. They would come back to school, and other children would make fun of them because, oh, you smell funny. You smell like an Indian.
Even though the slaves were now free, the Ku Klux Klan were still terrorizing the black people. So the black people said, there's enough of this. We have to get out of here. We have to find a better opportunity for ourselves and for our family. So during the Great Migration, 2 million free slaves moved up north seeking better jobs, better positions, and a better life. And one of them was my great-grandma, Ozella. When they got there, if they were able to get jobs, they would get the most degrading jobs. But even though they were put through these setbacks, they still survived, and they never gave up, and they never gave in. And this historically was the beginning of the black people being able to work their way up to the middle class. During the 1930s was the Great Depression due to the stock market crash. There were massive layoffs.
Butte, Montana was a copper mining town. And my grandfather lived during the Depression, and so the copper mines failed and he was on search for work. So we decided to ride the rails and search for jobs, him and a bunch of his friends, and thousands of other teenagers did that at that time. He rode the rails all the way over to San Francisco and rode the rails all the way back to Massachusetts. One time my grandfather worked all day unloading coal off a railroad cart, and all he got the entire day was 2 tomatoes for his pay. He had his aunt living in Boston, that's why he settled there, and he worked there as a union worker building the Mystic River Bridge. At the time, there were so many people out of work that they would actually stand lined up underneath the bridge, and when a man would fall to his death, the guy would just jump right up and take his place. There's a little bit of Irish everywhere you see, from bridges to the railroads. It's all throughout America. And all these were built with Irish labor.
Both sides of my families, which are Mexican, French, the French Creole side, always worked hard labor, which means cheap labor. And that is so wrong, it's so bad. They were proud to be Mexican Americans, but then again, you know, when you put different cultures together, it causes conflict.
So what happened was the Irish, they stayed together in groups, and that's how they built up their power. Later on, they would hire their friends and family and no other minorities.
Very often, people who have been persecuted, who have been through that hard time, as they get comfortable and life is good and politics are good, they start to become oppressors, and they start to turn on other people, other groups.
It's ironic how, because minorities are prejudiced against, they create prejudice against others.
I don't know, it's normal sometimes. It's not supposed to be normal, but everybody's prejudiced in their own way, but then you don't have to be hatred prejudice, you know? And I'm not that no more. White people are cool.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's just when you're growing up, a lot of people raise you to be prejudiced, you know? It comes from the home. That's where it comes from. We're not born prejudiced. It comes from our parents and our family. And
How you're brought up?
Yeah, how you're brought up. Well, I was racist. I didn't like white people. And that was because of what, you know, I was kind of taught in my society. They're trying to put us down, they're trying to keep us down, and they don't want us to succeed in life. So I was always like thinking that, well, even though I had, you know, white grandpa, whatever, but it was different because he was my grandpa.
My grandfather Norman is French and Indian. My Aunt Dolores, she's black and Indian. They married to in-laws that are Filipino, white, black, Hispanic, and it goes on and on and on with a mixture. My family's like gumbo, they're all mixed up.
Before the war broke out, Japanese have always been discriminated against. My grandpa and my grandma have told me stories about being called Japs and things like that. My grandparents were poor, and you know, when you're poor, you don't really have money, especially when you're starting in a new place. So my grandpa found work. He'd worked on the railroad before and eventually opened his own little tiny store that he and my grandma operated. And when the war broke out, there's this hysteria that Japanese Americans were a quote-unquote national security threat to the American government, and that eventually evolved to the internment camps. Imagine just having 1 week to just pack up and leave. To sell your house, take whatever materials you might need to this place that you don't even know where you're going. My family had to live in these like horse stables for a couple of months before they moved on to Heart Mountain. There were tall gates encircled with barbed wire and guards in these towers, but the guards, they were told, were to protect them from the outside forces coming in, but then the guns always seemed to be pointed inside towards the camp. My mom was born in 1944 in the camps. None of the Japanese Americans in the camps were un-American or anti-America. Inside the schools, children would just raise their right hand and place it over their heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance with just as much belief and strength as they would outside a camp. My grandparents have told me they didn't have time to be bitter. There was no time for bitterness, no time for hostile feelings. They just had to survive. During World War II, the Army was segregated. So we have separate divisions for each minority group.
Now, everybody's supposed to fight as a team, right? But there were separate troops. There were black troops and white troops.
We don't think about that now, but the segregation in the Army was completely normal. There was a great demand for soldiers in World War II. Japanese Americans showed this by volunteering to serve in the armed forces with the creation of the 442 and other regiments. They were the most decorated unit in the United States Army. For those people that said, yes, I'm an American, and to serve America, this country that it interned them, says so much about their character.
My grandfather was a photographer in Belgium. He had a beautiful wife, 2 kids. He owned his own business, but it all ended because they were Jewish. In May of 1942, World War II had already started, and people were starting to get taken to concentration camps, and my grandfather was taken to an auxiliary camp of Auschwitz, and his wife and 2 kids were taken to Auschwitz, and he never saw them again. I mean, try to imagine this. You're in a place where everybody looks like skeletons, and everyone's just so starving, you know? And he managed to get an onion from the kitchen, and he ate it, and he went back inside into where all the bunkers were. And, you know, an onion is a really strong smelling food, and he said that when he walked in, you know, everybody was looking at him, and, you know, it's so strong they can smell it right away, and people just just swarmed him. I mean, just swarmed him just to smell his breath. In December, I guess it was Christmas, and all the guards were getting drunk, so it was his perfect time, and he had managed to, you know, get a pair of wire cutters and had buried them. And it was Christmas and it was snowing, and there was all this snow, so he had to dig through the snow, dig through the dirt, find the pliers, wire cutters, and he made it out. And they got out, him and 2 other people, and when they were, I guess when they were on their way out, one guy got scared and went back, and my grandfather never heard from him again.
After the war ended, my grandparents went back to California and the camps are eventually closed. Just imagine being taken away from your home and placed in these camps, and then 5 years later just being given 25 bucks and just told, go start over. That's exactly what they did. Within one generation, the community was able to reconstruct and rebuild and reestablish their reputation.
My grandfather, you know, the only thing he could do to keep his mind off of what had happened was just to work. So my grandfather decided to come to America, and he opened a shop, and that's my grandmother. The American dream for him, it happened. I mean, of course, there's tons of work and determination, and he was able to pull it off.
When the black veterans came back to the United States, they looked around and they said, where is the justice? My father, he lived through all the racism. My father, he went to movies and he had to sit in the balcony because black people couldn't sit in the front. You know, my parents faced racism, dead smack in your face. This was the roots of the Civil Rights Movement. And Martin Luther King gave the I Have a Dream speech, and there were petitions, boycotts, sit-ins, marches in order to create change. And in the 60s, that's when blacks said no more, and the changes were made. After the 1960s, a lot of these rules that put down the blacks had changed. But did they really?
Within an hour of the verdict, roving, angry gangs were taking to the mean streets of South Central Los Angeles.
What makes me angry is the fact that racism still exists in America, you know.
What we're here trying to prove today is that these people are ungodly. They have no right to do what they do. If they want to remain to be faggots, then they ought to keep it in the closet.
I am a white, male, Christian, middle-class American. Why on earth would I ever choose to put myself in a minority group, especially one so hated as that of homosexuals? I was perhaps one of the most religious people you'd ever encounter when I was young. I was praying all the time. I had one of the most tender and beautiful relationships with God. And there's no room within my religion for somebody who's attracted to the same sex. So when I told my mother, she was far from prepared to tell my father. She, in fact, couldn't tell anybody, and it destroyed her. She spent weeks and weeks alone in her room crying.
I was in high school, and I remember in the gym locker, my friends used to talk about, oh my goodness, Bobby, Jean, and And Danny is so cute. Oh my God. And me, on the other hand, I started to have a lot of thoughts, inside myself. Day and night, I go to sleep saying to myself, oh my goodness, is it possible that can I be gay?
It's not easy to be gay and to be a high school student.
I had a boyfriend and I was with him for about five months, and he would tell me, I love you, and I would just tell him, well, I like you too, kind of thing. But when I met Jen, it was a whole different thing. I started to see the world in a whole different way, and it gave me hope that, you can fall in love. Gay people fall in love, and I can be happy.
We live in a world where it's still okay to hate gay people, to beat gay people up. Violence is not uncommon against gay people. Gay bashing is not just a term, it's something that we experience day after day.
You don't have to like me. Hey, you don't like me, that's your business. But you know what? I deserve, respect.
That's human rights, period. Respect me for me being gay. Respect me for being white. Respect me for being Mexican. Respect me for being straight. Even if you think it's wrong or right, just respect me for who I am.
My father tells me every day, Deloria, you're gonna carry on the leadership of trying to help our people overcome the barrier and overcome all these obstacles. And I think to myself, how is this possible?
When I grew up with my family, only thing I've seen was gangsters. I've seen people die, I've seen people hurt, and it's not really a pretty sight. I guess I changed because I seen that it was a lot of things going on, in my life that I knew it wasn't right and it was something wrong. And from there on, I decided to say, hey, this is the past, this is the present now. I'm going to college. And in the future, I plan to graduate with a bachelor's, have my American dream, my husband, my children, my house, my brand new truck, and just keep living and just keep trying to help until the day I die, basically.
I think that people really need to realize that even though I'm Native American, he's black, white, Irish, I think that we have to realize too that on a certain level, we're all humans. We all have the same values. We all want that good life and stuff, and be able to realize that we're all related also.
I think we are the ones who can make a difference with the knowledge of what our parents and our grandparents have gone through. We are the ones who can change it. We are actually the turning point.
I think we're actually all powerful, and our voices do count.
I want everybody to be free. I want everybody to live well. I want everybody to be happy. And that's the American dream, baby. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
There is a feeling about being an American. There is a certain special privilege that we have being Americans, because we kind of get to start over.
The American dream is something that everyone, everywhere, somehow seems to understand.
This radical idea of creating one country from every kind of people.
From every corner of the earth.
With liberty and justice for all.
And it's very beautiful, but it's also very difficult.
And it's up to us.
It's up to us.
And it's up to us to make this dream come true.
I have a dream that one day Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the hiking Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the hiking Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado.